Hello and welcome. My name is Biagio Mazza, Pastoral Associate at St. Sabina Parish in Belton, Missouri, and I'm here to welcome you to another Do You Know series question. As we conclude our series on the history of the Mass, today's Do You Know question is, do you know the impact of the Vatican II on the Mass? Pope John the 23rd was elected in 1958 and called for a council as early as January the 25th, 1959, desiring a council that would update the Church, but would also look and examine at many of the calls for reforms that have been going on for over several centuries. And so as a result, the council was convened on October 11th, 1962, and one of the very first dynamics and emphases that Pope John the 23rd wanted for the council was to focus on the liturgy, because he believed in the old principle very much that lex orandi, lex credendi. And this is that principle that basically states that the way people pray actually strongly influences what and how they believe. And so as a result, he felt that if we started to look at the liturgy and reform the liturgy, it would lead to a reform of a new vision of what it means to be church and what it means to celebrate the Mass. And so as a result, by 1963, on December the 4th, 1963, the first Constitution of the Second Vatican Council was approved, and this was the Constitution on Divine Liturgy, known in Latin as Sacrosanctum Concilium. This particular document stressed heavily, the principles of this document was full, conscious, and active participation on the part of all gathered at the liturgy. And so this vision, therefore, impacted all the changes that would flow from the Second Vatican Council as it impacted on the Mass. And so I wanted to just articulate some of those changes and why the focus was changed this way. The first and foremost principle that was established out of this, that we are all called to the priesthood of all the faithful. In and through our baptism, we share in the priesthood of Christ, and therefore all of us are called to participate fully in the liturgy. The Mass itself, as the Missal of Second Vatican Council began with, that the Mass begins when the people have gathered, and thus the focus was on the whole community gathering for the celebration of the Mass. The Mass was to be in the language of the people, in the vernaculars, so that people could understand and fully participate. The altar, if you recall, was removed from the wall now and placed in the middle of the sanctuary, so that people could, so that there would be more engagement of the whole community. The presider, previous to this, by the way, with regards to the altar, the tabernacle was removed from the altar and actually located in a separate space altogether. The presider, the one who led the celebration, was now facing the people and engaging the people in this communal celebration that we were all part of. Processions, singing, responses, all these nonverbals were all ways in which the council encouraged during Mass the active participation of the people. We had the sign of peace, in which we acknowledged one another and shared Christ's peace with one another during Mass. There was a ministry explosion, a significant amount of ministers now that enhanced the liturgical celebration. We had Eucharistic ministers, we had music ministers, lectors, hospitality ministers, sacristans, etc., etc. And all these enhanced the celebration and the active participation of all the people who was, as we celebrated the liturgy. Communion was encouraged now both in the bread as well as the wine, and it was to be received standing, and the full option and encouragement of receiving communion in the hand as opposed to on the tongue, although that option is still available. The focus was also both on the scriptures as well as on the bread and wine. In other words, Vatican II said we were fed from two tables, the table of the Word and the table of the bread and wine, the Eucharist, and they both formed one single unity of worship. The homilies in the past had sermons that were not based on anything regarding the readings, but now the priest was encouraged to do homilies that were based on the readings that were proclaimed during that particular liturgy. Private masses were highly discouraged, and multiple masses going on at the same time were forbidden. These were the masses that would be going on the private altars or the side altars in a church. These were strictly forbidden. The lectionary, the whole lectionary and the readings that would be proclaimed at Mass was revised, and the Sunday lectionary was expanded into a 3-year cycle where we would be exposed to more readings from Scripture, and the weekday cycle was expanded into a 2-year cycle so that we would have all greater exposure to Scripture than ever before. The rubrics of the Mass, the directions with regards to how to say Mass and so on, they were greatly simplified, and more spontaneity and creativity was allowed in the Mass. So all these things were were a result of the key vision of the Second Vatican Council and the Sacrosanctum Concilium, that full conscious and active participation was to take part on the people of all the people participating in the liturgy. If Luther had been alive during the Second Vatican Council, he would probably have been one of the most prominent theologians at the council, calling for many of the reforms that eventually, after 400 years, the Church saw as being on target and seen as things that were needed. It only took us 400 years to learn from one another, but hopefully as we continue our continued involvement in the liturgy and focus on the liturgy, we will continue to learn from one another and continue to be people who are full conscious and active participants in all of our liturgical actions. So I hope this has helped to explain just a bit of what the impact of the Second Vatican Council was on the Mass, and I hope you will return again once more as we continue to explore various issues with regards to our history and our tradition and our faith. Thank you very much.